Miriam Feldblum, and I'm the Executive Director of the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. The overarching goal of the report and the campaign we're launching is to dramatically increase refugee student access to U.S. higher education. The report lays out a blueprint for making university sponsorship a reality in the U.S., which would enable refugee students to be admitted as students at a U.S. college or university and simultaneously as refugees with a pathway to permanent residence. Before turning to our agenda and speakers, I'd like to extend 3 big thank yous. First, to our partners who, together with the President's Alliance team, serve as the coordinating team for the initiative and report. They are the UNHCR, the Global Task Force on Third Country Education Pathways, Student Voices for Refugees Network, and the University Alliance for Refugees and At-Risk Migrants. And a tremendous shout out to our project manager, Laura Wagner, and our project associate, Oscar Bahati. Second, to all those participants involved in the initiative, whose work and insights made this possible. It was critical to us as students with lived experiences of forced displacement played leadership roles in the initiative and report. Participants included current and former refugee students, other student advocates, campus representatives, humanitarian and refugee resettlement professionals and leaders, along with higher education, international education, and philanthropic leaders. To all the participants, and especially our many hardworking co-chairs, our deepest appreciation and admiration. Finally, this would not have come to fruition as it did without the thought, partnership, and generosity, in fact and spirit, of the donors who underwrote the planning. Thanks to Ed Shapiro and the Shapiro Foundation, the Open Society Foundations, the Walder Foundations, and G. Barry Landry. We have a full agenda and an incredible lineup of speakers today. Our aim today is to bring to life university sponsorship, what it can mean for refugee students in campuses, and how you can help spread the awareness of the program and build support, as well as for what's urgently needed, namely to increase refugee student access to higher education. I'll provide a brief setup, and then we'll hear from Gillian Triggs, UNHCR Assistant High Commissioner for Protection on the global content of refugee education. Next, Sarah Cross, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, will share a few opening remarks. I'll then turn the program over to Eric Hoover, a reporter from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Eric will facilitate a discussion with 3 students, Miriam Ching, Ding Manya, and Shabnam Faye, and with Bard College President Leon Botstein and Errol Fitzgerald of Salve Regina University. Mary Maker, a refugee student and UNHCR supporter, will offer some concluding thoughts, and after which we'll outline next steps and have time for questions. Please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A feature, and our speakers will try to answer throughout as well as at the end. To set the context for the remarks and discussion to follow, let me highlight now 4 key recommendations we make in the report. First and most significantly, the report calls for the US government to create the necessary policy infrastructure to enable a university sponsorship for refugee students. We applaud the Biden administration for their commitment to create a new P4 private sponsorship category, and the report shows how college and university sponsorship of refugee students can be part of that initiative. As I noted at the top, this creates the ability for refugees to access both higher education and a pathway to permanent residency in the US. The reason for why this is needed is that the existing pathways available to refugee students present considerable obstacles, as Eric and the students will discuss, and as you can see in the graphic that's displayed. Second, the participants recognize that many of these concepts are new to US higher education, which is why, as part of the initiative, we're launching this response campaign, whose goal is to increase awareness, understanding, and engagement. Third, the report recognizes that campuses cannot do this on their own and recommends the establishment of an implementing organization that would act as a bridge between refugee students overseas and the US colleges and universities that partner with the organization. I'll not go into the many details laid out in the report, except to underscore that we stress the importance of a student-centered process, the value of a student cohort model, and the need for diversity of funding sources. Finally, while the focus of the report and today's discussion is on this new program, our policy group also developed recommendations on how to improve the F1 visa system to make it more accessible to refugee students. Now, it's my honor to introduce UNHCR Assistant High Commissioner for Protection, Gillian Triggs, who's a highly renowned expert in international law and who has worked in service to human rights and the refugee cause. We are grateful to have her here with us today to share what this moment and program could mean in the global refugee crisis. Over to you, Gillian.
Thank you very much, Miriam. And I must say, on behalf of the UN Refugee Agency, I'm really delighted to be at this launch. It's very exciting, with a great vision to build student pathways through the US higher education sponsorship program. So good luck with developing this, and you have our full support here in Geneva. We'll assist in any way we can. Of course, in many respects, the greatest gift that you can give to a young refugee is access to education. And I know this from my own experience of visiting island detention centers in the Indian Ocean. And I met a young 12-year-old girl who were from South Sudan. Her parents had been killed, her brothers and sisters had completely disappeared, and an aunt managed to find the money to smuggle her out of the country, and she found her way into the Indian Ocean on her way to Indonesia. She was picked up and then held in detention indefinitely for more than a year. And when I met her, she told me her story quite calmly, but when she said she'd had no education for the last 2 years, she burst into tears. And I knew that here was a 12-year-old well aware that if she didn't have access to education, then her future was very dim indeed. She said to me she wanted to be a poet. And to my shame, I was a little doubtful about this. But she rang me about 3 years later with refugee status in the United States at an American university. She'd written a book of poetry and asked me to launch it if I would. Well, I think that example, and there are so many, many others, we can see the role that refugees can play in our societies when we give them a chance. We know now that there are doctors on the front line of the pandemic response. They're scientists, Nobel Prize winning authors, but they're also people who've kept our supermarkets stocked, our hospitals clean, and cared for our elderly. All of these examples show us that talent is universal, but opportunity to use that talent is not. And right now, the UN Refugee Agency has reported that more than 84 million people are forcibly displaced in the world. They have no choice but to flee. They're uprooted, displaced, and dispossessed, but they have talent, and we must create more opportunities to use that talent and to enable it to be developed. Higher education is absolutely critical. It's probably true that most displaced people do have access as children to primary schools, and approximately 35% to secondary school education. But the educational opportunities at the tertiary level have been tiny. Just a few years ago, there were 1%. It's moved to 5%, which is important. That this initiative by the United States through this initiative, through this launch, provides an opportunity to increase that number significantly. And we really do applaud the initiative. We must, of course, protect the gains that have been made and will be made by continuing to invest in refugee education at all levels. And we must expand the opportunities for higher education for everybody. Countries that have been ripped apart by war need educated leaders to help to rebuild. And this is sadly a problem which is escalating. This year, the UN Refugee Agency has declared 39 different conflicts and emergencies, 21 of them new this year. It's it is literally an unprecedented rise in conflict, which of course is the immediate cause, not necessarily the longer term cause, but the immediate cause of most displacements. And the United States initiative through this program complements America's role as our largest donor. And we expect that next year, the United States will be the largest country for refugee resettlement. I'm especially pleased to know this, and as a member of the UN Refugee Agency, so pleased to work with the United States, because I too have benefited from your educational programs. I finished my law degree, but then had the opportunity to do my master's degree and to study international law, including human rights and refugee law, in the United States in the very early 70s with a scholarship. And I understand and have benefited, of course, from that opportunity that I would not otherwise have had. So I think that the efforts by this President's Alliance is a very important one, and one that is consistent with achieving some of the Sustainable Development Goals under the United Nations auspices to be achieved by 2030. The initiative brings together governments, universities, the refugee voice and refugee students, civil society, a whole of society approach that's in line with the Global Compact on Refugees, that of course adopts the principle of the equitable sharing of responsibilities and burdens for those who've been displaced. So thank you for this initiative. The President's Alliance on Higher Education is bringing together dozens of organizations, including students and young people, to bring their real life experience. We wish you every success with the initiative, and we look forward to supporting you in any way we can from our country offices and from here in Geneva. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Assistant High Commissioner. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce Sarah Cross. Sarah serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, PRM, overseeing the Office of Refugee Admissions and the Office of Multilateral Coordination and External Relations. We are very grateful for the work and engagement of PRM. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Miriam, for that warm introduction and for inviting me to join this gathering today. On behalf of PRM, let me just congratulate all the individuals and organizations involved in the initiative on U.S. education pathways for refugee students on the release of this report. Thank you for the thoughtful work that went into producing it over the last 6 months. And let me also extend particular thanks to the President's Alliance for your leadership on university sponsorship, and to the partner organizations who made the initiative's work possible, including UNHCR, the Global Task Force on Third Country Education Pathways, the University Alliance for Refugees and At-Risk Migrants, and the Student Voices for Refugees Network. The release of the report comes at a timely moment as we in PRM work toward the launch of a first of its kind private sponsorship pilot program in the United States. This new program represents an innovation that we believe will strengthen and expand the refugee resettlement program by creating a new avenue that will empower individuals and organizations to play a leading role in directly welcoming and integrating refugees into communities across the country. Earlier this fall, in our annual report to Congress on the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, or USRAP, we were pleased to affirm our intention to launch the private sponsorship pilot program in 2022. In the report, we also announced the key policy priorities and the elements of the pilot program as incorporated into the new Priority 4, or P4 category for privately sponsored refugees to access the USRAP. Critically, the new P4 category will enable private sponsors to identify refugees to be referred to the USRAP and then to apply to support their resettlement. The pilot program and the P4 category underpinning it have been intentionally designed to facilitate the creation of new pathways that expand refugee opportunities in the United States. It will enable a variety of organizations, including colleges and universities, to identify refugees that they are uniquely situated to support, and then empower those organizations to play a leading role in resettling those refugees here. So for this reason, we think the pilot program presents an exciting opportunity to support the establishment of a new education pathway in the form of a university sponsorship program for refugee students, as proposed in the report. So with the U.S. having the world's largest higher education sector, we strongly believe that a university sponsorship program has great potential to expand refugee access to higher education in the United States and to meaningfully leverage the involvement of U.S. college and university communities in the welcome and integration of refugee students. As we continue to develop our plans to roll out the pilot program next year, we welcome all of your ideas and perspectives on how the pilot program can incorporate a specific university sponsorship pathway, and look forward to reviewing the thinking you've presented in the report. While we're committed to working through the report's recommendations, including the policy changes required on our end to make this work, we know that our activity alone will not be sufficient. As the report rightly recognizes, and other speakers have noted, the creation of a university sponsorship program will require much more than PRM's involvement. It will require new collective action from a wide-ranging coalition comprised of U.S. higher education institutions, philanthropic organizations, international education and admissions experts, and college and university students themselves. That is why the engagement of the stakeholders represented here today will be critical to our ability to successfully establish a university sponsorship program. We look forward to working closely with all of you in the coming months as we move closer to launching the private sponsorship program and to realizing its promise to unlock a new pathway for refugee students to study, to resettle, and to rebuild new lives for themselves here in the United States. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah. That is so exciting. Thank you for your leadership and words. We are committed to working with you. Now, I am happy to introduce Eric Hoover, a Chronicle of Higher Education reporter who's been covering refugee access to higher education and who'll facilitate our next two sets of conversation. Over to you, Eric.
All right. Thank you very much, Miriam. I'm really happy to be here today. And I'll add briefly as a side note, very recently, I've heard a great deal of interest and yes, even excitement from a number of college presidents and also admissions and enrollment leaders in the US. And it's not every day that I make a phone call to a campus and hear excitement of this kind, or at least interest in something new. So I just wanted to flag that. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here because I have the honor of introducing three students who will be describing their experiences accessing higher education here in the US. And so I'd like to introduce these three students to you, and then I'm going to throw a few questions at them. So first we have Shabnam Fayez, who is currently finishing her master's in human rights studies at Columbia University in New York City. We have Ding Manya, who is studying systems engineering at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And finally, Miriam Ching, who is currently a pre-med junior at Trinity College in Connecticut. So I'd like to ask all of you, you have such important experiences and you have perspectives that many people tuning in don't have. And so we want to hear from you. And I wanted to start with you, Miriam, if I might. Could you please tell us how you came to study in the US and about one challenge you faced in that process?
Thank you, Eric, for the introductions. I came to the United States through the USREP, United States Refugee Admission Program, when I was in middle school with my family, which is in 2012. Because I came in through the USREP, I went through the same college application process as US citizens. However, I do face numerous of challenges in trying to access to higher education. First, I was limited in terms of which college I could apply to because of the great financial setback. Second, I don't have a lot of support or mentorship from my high school nor my family in terms of applying through the Common App, writing the essay, looking for scholarships. I ended up coming to Trinity College through the Posse Scholarship. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to pose the same question to you, if I might. Shabnam, how did you get here to the US to get to the campus where you're studying now? And tell us about an obstacle that you had to get over or get through along the way.
Thank you so much, Eric. So I came to the US on an F1 visa, and it was in 2015. I was able to get this visa because of a financial sponsor who also served as my host family in the US. They enrolled me in a postgraduate year of high school so that I could improve my English and then apply to a US liberal arts college. I would have never been able to access this process to come to the US on my own. And as a native Dari speaker, I also needed 1 year of intensive study in English to be ready for US higher education. When it comes to challenges, one of the challenges that I faced was that my F1 visa expired when I was a sophomore in college. To be able to participate in a study abroad that was offered by Earlham College, and it was part of my major, I had to renew my F1 visa. And in order to get a new visa, I had to go back to Afghanistan, which I did during the summer of 2018. Once I got there, I realized that the situation in Afghanistan was worse than before I had been there. My family found ourselves and our home in the midst of gun battles, and my father's workplace was bombed twice. When I left, I knew I would never be able to return. So I also knew my father was planning to take my mother and my 4 younger siblings out of Afghanistan to become refugees for a second time. So that year, after returning to the US, my US host family helped me apply for asylum in 2019. Getting asylum was a long process that left me in limbo for 2.5 years. The whole time I was uncertain about my future, and I was not able to make important decisions.
Okay, thank you. Ding, I'd like to ask you to tell us about your journey. How did you make your way to George Washington University, and what challenges stood in your path?
Yes, thank you, Eric. So I came to the US also through the F1 student visa with the support of a gap year program that I participated in, Bridge to Rwanda. And since this is the visa type that many educational institutions understand in the US, I had to possess a passport like every other international student that come to the US for higher education. But because I had refugee status, I had to travel back to South Sudan to make the passport, of which the process of obtaining it was a little bit challenging. You can imagine that you haven't been to this country for such a long time, but because of this one in a lifetime opportunity, I had to make that decision and go back to South Sudan, make my passport, and then present it at the US consulate in order to get my F1 visa. So that's how I found myself at the George Washington University.
Okay, thank you very much, Ding. I might stick with you for a moment, Ding. I was thinking about this report that is full of recommendations for the university sponsorship program here in the US. But as I said before, your perspective is so important. And I'm curious to hear what would be, in your mind, one key recommendation that you would have for the university sponsorship program to consider?
I think the university sponsorship program should support and partner with refugee-led organizations that provide pathways into the US higher education. For instance, programs like Elimisha Kakuma, they are organizations that are created and led by former refugees to expose the incredible hidden talents that are found in the refugee camp. So this program working hand in hand with the preparatory program that help students to apply to universities around the world and specifically in the US, I think will be a key recommendation that the President's Alliance should highly consider, because it will be giving hope to refugees that want to pursue higher education.
Okay, thank you very much, Ding. I think that's important. We're talking about a kind of perhaps about a very broad and wide network of partners throughout the world. And I mean, to my eye, perhaps there might be a great need for creativity when it comes to seeking out those partnerships and helping students help this program get underway. Miriam, I'd like to ask you a question and ask you to please go back to something you said. You mentioned the PASI scholarship, and I wondered if you might please elaborate on how that program has helped you along your educational path and what you think the proposed sponsorship program could learn from the Posse program?
Thank you. I'm really grateful that I have this Posse scholarship. It has helped me tremendously from providing tuitions, internship opportunities, to mentorship and self-advocacy skills. And one of the biggest impact is the fact that I'm part of a cohort, a Posse. Posse basically means a group. This allowed me to have a close-knit community before I even arrive on campus. And also when I arrive on campus, I have a place that a family or friends that I can go to when I'm struggling through my educational journey. I'm really glad that the Education Pathway Initiative was inspired by the Posse Foundation cohort model. It will really make a difference for those coming from overseas to give them that sense of belonging and community right from the start, and also making sure that they have enough financial support as well.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. So it's important just to reflect on what we just heard from Ding, a reflection about the importance of partnerships and seeking out perhaps various kinds of partnerships. And Miriam is reminding us that whenever there's something new, right, there might be something to learn from existing organizations or existing programs, right? Particularly in this case, in your experience, the Posse program has helped you. And so perhaps there's something important to glean from the Posse program and its cohort model as we're thinking about what this university sponsorship program might look like or could look like. Shabnam, I'd like to pull back and ask you kind of a big picture question. It might seem like a simple question, but it's a really, really important question. So I'm going to pose it to you. What do refugee students bring to college campuses?
I think refugee students, they bring with them a set of unique and diverse experiences that not only include their own culture, languages, and traditions, but their perspectives. Having lived through conflict, displacement, trauma, death of family members, poverty, and uncertainty. Many of these refugee students who come, they have been separated from their family at a very young age. And because of that, they had to become self-reliant. Because of these experiences, they do not take life and educational opportunities for granted. And these experiences, they treasure every opportunity and they work hard to make the most out of these opportunities. Those who survive also are marked by an enduring hope and optimism. These perspectives and experiences can enhance the thinking, opinions, and experiences of other students on campus around them with regard to immigrants and refugees and also other cultures.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've raised several important points here, and what you just said echoes what I have heard from several refugee students around the world. And I also think it's important to flag the idea that it's not just a refugee student who might benefit immensely from the opportunity to study on any college campus, to study on a US college campus, but it's also the benefits that flow from having refugee students on your campus. And that's something I've heard a lot about recently. Colleges, students who happen not to be refugees telling me about the benefits that flow to them by having refugee students on their campus. I wondered if I might pick on you, Shabnam. I don't mean to pick on you, but I was curious if briefly here before we have to move on to the next panel, I wondered if I might ask you to think back for a second about what you described, your challenge applying, getting an F1 visa and applying for asylum. Just real quickly, I wondered, how do you think the university sponsorship program could help future students encountering and overcoming the challenge that you described there?
Yeah, so the challenge that I talked about was the F1. So I think this program also needs to take into account that many students will need additional study in English before beginning a university program. I was lucky to have a financial sponsor. She was a professor and university administrator. She knew how to navigate the English language issues, the higher education admissions and scholarship process. And she helped me with the asylum process, because otherwise I would not have been able to do this on my own. So having someone who can sponsor and be in charge of the students would really help.
Okay. Thank you very much to you, Shabnam, Ding, and Miriam. Thank you for sharing your perspectives with us today. Really great to hear from each of you. And now I'm going to turn to a couple leaders in higher education and ask them to share their perspectives on university sponsorship. And I'm pleased to introduce Leon Botstein, who is president of Bard College, and Erin Fitzgerald, who is director of the Center for Global Education and Fellowships at Salve Regina University. And she also played a role in shaping this report and its recommendations. So I'm going to ask both of you this question, and I'd like to start with you, if I might, President Botstein. I'd like to hear about your perspective on why higher education leaders should get involved in this. What are the benefits that you see, and how might this impact a participating campus?
I think the most important impact is, if you will, spiritual, that if you're going to be a great institution of learning, you have to have an open and clear policy of tolerance and of generosity, and to open your doors to refugees is one of the primary imperatives. As one of the refugee students pointed out, not only does it give them a fresh start, but they make an enormous contribution to the culture of a campus by showing that the universal aspects of learning, the mathematics, the physics, the things we learn apply to everyone. And we share the human condition. On the other hand, people don't have equal access and have the same opportunity. And we have to show moral leadership, especially as Americans. And we have to find things that we all, in a highly polarized political environment, can agree upon. And helping young people and providing them education is something that can be a common ground between people who otherwise disagree. So it is a necessity, a moral imperative on the part of universities.
Thank you. Erin, I wonder what you might add to those thoughts.
Well, that was beautifully said by Dr. Botstein. But I would just add, from our perspective, Salve Regina is a small faith-based institution. We're founded by the Sisters of Mercy, and our mission is grounded in the critical concerns of our founding order, which are immigration, access to education, the dignity of every person, and nonviolence, and more. So for us, assisting international students from crisis areas, assisting refugee students, really literally embodies our institutional mission in a really clear, concrete, and meaningful way. And I think a way in which the whole university community can understand, in a way sometimes the mission can appear abstract or unrelated. Sometimes this really is sort of an interesting opportunity to embody the institutional mission. And I would add also that for us, this project, probably one of the surprising benefits, I think, in addition to all that the students add to campus, as the students so beautifully said, is the opportunity for cross-campus collaboration, between students and faculty and students working together in a shared purpose and to uphold our mission in a way that's compelling, interesting, and maybe a little bit more fun than is obvious from the surface. And then finally, I'd say these students that we've brought to Salve Regina, who came through the F1 program, as the students earlier said, primarily from Syria, they've been exceptional graduates, and any exceptional graduate is a benefit to the institution. as well. Through their successes, their accomplishments, they shine a light on the potential of the institution as a whole. And I'd end with that.
All right, thank you, Erin. I might stick with you for a moment here and draw on your expertise. I know there's great interest in this program, but maybe people are trying to picture it and visualize it a little bit more. Could you walk us through briefly just how both a student and a participating college or university might kind of experience this sponsorship program from, say, the point of application to a refugee student's arrival on a campus?
Okay, well, I mean, my involvement to date, Salve's involvement to date has been through the F1 program, and that program has presented some obstacles, as the students alluded to. So although we may position ourselves, the institution, as having a scholarship, we need to connect with the students who need the opportunity of that scholarship. And for a small institution like ourselves, it's sometimes we have all the will in the world, but not necessarily the connection to the students in these crisis zones and or to refugee students directly. So what I see the potential in this program is through the implementing organization, through all the involved parties, non-governmental and governmental, overseas and inside the US, the opportunity there is for the student, the refugee student, to experience this as sort of a seamless, fully sponsored, comprehensive access to education, as opposed to the F1 program where hooray, they got the scholarship, but now they still have this financial gap, which they had to navigate themselves, you know, so the room, board, and all the other pieces, what to do. In this sort of thoughtful proposal, we're thinking about both the needs of the institution in terms of the support the institution needs to prepare to bring the refugee student successfully to campus and through the educational enterprise, but also what the student needs to navigate the application process and the arrival on campus. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but I think this sort of comprehensive approach is what's going to be help us build on what we already have in place in a better way for the student and for the higher educational institutions.
Thank you, Erin. That's very helpful. President Botstein, if I might turn back to you, you laid out a very eloquent kind of underpinning, including a moral underpinning perhaps, for the possibility of this sponsorship program. But I wonder what you might say to folks on campuses who are wondering about practical kind of next steps. How can campus leaders start thinking about or preparing for sponsoring refugee students? What would be a couple of quick things you might advise them or tell them to do?
So let me say first that it's interesting that Salve and Bard couldn't be more different. We're not faith-based, except we have faith in reason, but we don't have a catechism. We don't have a religious base in that sense, and yet we come to the same point. On the question of the practical, I think number one that it's in the self-interest of institutions. So many institutions are concerned about their visibility, their enrollment, and that this is an enormous opportunity to recruit and find students who are, as many of the students say, very enthusiastic about being students. And so the practical obstacles are enormous. We, for example, have taken out 177 students out of Kabul as partners of the American University in Afghanistan. So we're now facing bringing all 177 to one of BARD's degree programs in Berlin, in Bishkek, in the American University of Central Asia, and BARD here. BARD Andel, with a 2,000 person enrollment, we're looking at bringing about 50 students or Afghan. Now, the practical issues there are primarily providing them the realistic support services and to funding them, because I think the funding, Erin points out very well, that the funding issues are very significant. So I think pressure has to be brought, I believe, on the richer private institutions that have large endowments and actually have some moral responsibility to spend that endowment in the service of a cause which is fundamental to their humanistic sensibilities.
Right.
And it's a matter of funding. It's very important is that I think Erin says very well, just to bring a student, you also have to be prepared to deal with the various needs that are specific to their experience.
Right. Well said. Both of you. Thank you, President Botstein, and thank you, Erin Fitzgerald, for sharing these important thoughts.
Thank you for having us and supporting this initiative.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to turn now to Mary Maker. Mary Maker is currently pursuing an undergraduate degree in theater at St. Olaf College in Minnesota, and she is an advocate on behalf of the forcibly displaced through her work as a high-profile supporter of UNHCR. Mary, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I was interested to hear your important perspective on a key question. What would the impact of this sponsorship program be? Could you please explain the impact that you see this program having on refugee students? Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry, the
That's
whole
all right.
Zoom.
No worries.
Thank you so much, Eric. As you've all heard from my fellow students, the barriers to accessing higher education for refugees are immense. But also you've heard from the folks who worked to design the new university sponsorship program. There's an alternative that could provide a much needed pathway for refugee students to access higher education. Now, in my experience, I know the impact that access to higher education has. I myself has been stuck in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya after graduating high school for 4 years, trying to get any scholarship or opportunity, but only a few opportunities presented themselves. All of us who had graduated high school had been met by this dead end, scrambling for any chance that came to the refugee camp. Some got lucky and others didn't, and the cycle ended. You had to wait for the next cycle of limited opportunities to present itself. That's 1 year passed. Then you have to fight for your chance again the following year, and 1 year turns into 2, into 4, or a never chance. For most of us, our years of education have been wasted in war. Now, lack of access to higher education becomes another facet of our struggle. I see the potential of students from Kakuma refugee camp. They have hope. And despite the realities of the numbers making it to colleges, they scramble for available chances every year without fail. In April, my friends and I started this nonprofit, Elimisha Kakuma, which means Educate Kakuma in Swahili. In our work, we help students prepare for and apply to higher education opportunities in the US. The process is long and challenging. A consolidated application process, the support of a US-based organization, an alternative F1 visa, which is often out of reach for refugee students, and a pathway to permanent residency in the US would literally ease much of the burden of this process. Now, the voices you're hearing today are only 5% of the very small percentages of refugees who are able to access higher education. And even though we are accessing higher education, our path and our future beyond graduation is always uncertain. For many refugee students in the United States with an F1 visa, including myself, we don't know if we will be able to stay in the US or where we are going to turn to after graduation. We are here to speak and advocate for 95% of refugees who cannot and will not be able to access higher education unless we work together and commit to fundamental changes and to significantly open up long roadblocks, pathways to higher education. Now, the US has over 4,000 colleges and universities. And if even a fraction, just a small fraction of them commits to sponsoring a refugee student through university sponsorship, we can vastly shift the trajectories of lives of hundreds of refugees. We refugee students not only bring diversity, but also life skills and new perspectives on campus, inspired by our stories of overcoming adversities, resilience, and hopes of reshaping the lives that have been written for us. And it starts here today. This is the impact. And so many refugees like me in refugee camps that have potential, hopes and dreams, capability can start here. So let's board that boat of hope. Despite many of us being resilient, the strength can diminish each time there's no light. That's how I'll put it.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, President Botstein, Erin, and all the speakers for sharing both the urgent need and the powerful promise that university sponsorship of refugee students can bring. Mary said it so beautifully. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Cross, for your commitment to make this private sponsorship happen. University sponsorship has the power to be life-changing for individual students and transformational for institutions. It's both a moral imperative for higher education, as President Botstein shared, and a talent imperative for our campuses and country, as Mary just noted. We're excited to make this happen, but in order to do so, we need your help. Here are 3 ways that you can start to engage. First, commit to telling at least one other person about the response campaign. The priority of the response campaign is to spread awareness so campuses know and understand university refugee sponsorship. The response in our name refers to refugee sponsorship for education. We've developed a toolkit on spreading awareness and engagement on campus. Sign up on our landing page to get more information, and we're also sharing a link to the toolkit. Second, support the broader push for private sponsorship that Assistant Secretary Cross spoke to, and launching the pilot P4 that would include university sponsorship. This is really essential in making this program possible. Last but not least, advocate to the State Department and to other agencies for improvements to the F1 visa system to make it more accessible now for refugee students. This is urgent now and will continue to be relevant in the future, as we know that even with the new university sponsorship program, not all refugee students will have access to it. With that, I want to thank again all of our speakers, and now turn back to Eric, who can maybe take some questions that have been coming in and some questions that he has in mind. Eric.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go. Okay. I'm back. I'm not back. There we go. All right, here I am. Thank you, Miriam. I wanted to get to a few questions here, and I think I'll start with one just kind of clarifying question about where things stand right now that someone has asked. It's a 2-parter, so I'll throw it out. And it goes like this. Has this initiative already obtained the full support of U.S. policymakers or executive branch? What is the likelihood of this policy being implemented by the U.S. government?
Well, why don't I start off with that? And let me also invite all the panelists to turn on their cameras again, because there may be questions for you that Eric has. And I think that what we heard today from Assistant Secretary Cross is so exciting, because she has reaffirmed her commitment. And I see Assistant Secretary Cross is on the as part of the panel. So let me turn to her.
Thanks, Miriam. Can you all hear? Okay, great. So yes, it's a great question where things stand. As I noted before, we're really committed to launching this program and excited to see it take off in 2022. We were originally planning to get it started early in 2022, but as many of you know, we've had to shift our attention a little bit in the last few months as we've sought to undertake this historic effort to resettle tens of thousands of Afghans and bring them to communities across the United States. But what we've tried to do in that instance is really to use the opportunity to start to build the groundwork for the private program and to start to build some best practice around it as we look toward launching this program in next year. I think some of you may know that that we've been working to create some flexibilities. We've worked to launch a whole new program together with the Community Sponsorship Hub around sponsor circles, which will enable individuals to directly sponsor Afghans who have arrived. And of course, we also hope to see members of the college and university community participate in this program as a means of expanding resettlement now. But this is sort of laying the groundwork for the future. And then as we turn the corner into next year, we still have a fair bit of work to do in terms of really developing and further refining the policy parameters of the program. And we look forward to being in close conversation with all of you on this call and in really close lockstep with the university and college communities, which will help us within the US government really understand what is needed on your end and what each of us can bring to the table here, because obviously there's a lot for us still to learn in terms of the college admissions and mentorship and academic preparedness and the kinds of questions that we will need to start to grapple with as we start to implement this program. So we're eager to have those conversations, and we'll be going through sort of consultation phase for the next few months as we prepare to develop this. And then alongside that, we are also planning to issue, once we've established the policy parameters, to really issue a call for proposals that will seek to start to provide funding support for the new infrastructure that we know is going to be needed, and that many of my fellow colleagues on this call have already alluded to in terms of a coordinating body and implementing partner both domestically and internationally that we will need to partner with to establish this new infrastructure. So there's still a lot of work ahead, but we're fully committed to it and are really excited to see it take off next year. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We heard from a student earlier about the importance of just coordination and partnerships. So here's a question that is perhaps in some ways relevant to that. What role can nonprofit organizations that work with refugee students and displaced students play in helping with this initiative?
I think we should ask maybe the students to start us off. How about, would one of the students, maybe Miriam, who've been involved in the initiative, do you want to think about the role of other organizations?
Sure, I can take on it. I think it's really important to have like as much as like organizations involved. This can strengthen our initiative, and also like the more connection there is, the better it is for to create more opportunity for overseas refugee students as well as for domestic refugee students as well. I don't know if I answered that question, but.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Another question for the students, and maybe I'll ask one of the either Ding or Shabnam to tell us, share your thoughts briefly about the answer to this question. How do you see your roles and the roles of other students on campuses when it comes to supporting the development and implementation of a U.S. initiative for refugee students? What role can students play here? Ding, I'm going to ask you what you see, please.
Mary, let's hear from Mary.
Come again on the role.
Just the question is about the role that students on campus can play in supporting the development and the implementation of this initiative. What would be an effective role?
I feel like the most effective role is when the initiative comes from the student, it is stronger. Like, for instance, let's just say with the organization that I started with my friends, Elimisha Kakuma, I started talking to schools and be like, hey, y'all, if you just take one refugee student, they're going to bring so much difference into your school. And for some reason, like administrations kind of listen to that when it comes from a manifestation of a student and why it is really important. It really becomes such a powerful confession, or like a powerful thing for the universities to take. So for university students, or like for any student all around the world, is just like reaching out to schools and actually telling them the importance of giving other refugee students the opportunity to come to their campuses. When that is done, when that kind of advocacy is done, schools then see the need of actually giving more students. I don't know, like it plays a big role in addition to what organizations are doing in trying to get universities to actually commit to students, but it is much stronger when it comes from the students, like especially when it comes from refugee students themselves.
Okay, thank you, Mary. So here's a good question. Perhaps this is for Miriam or someone else. Will this program benefit refugees living outside of refugee camps? And related, will there be a priority system for refugees from particular regions of the world, or will it be open to refugees from across the globe?
I think that's a great question. And if you reading the report, you'll see that our goal is to be as inclusive and accessible as possible, recognizing the diversity of refugee population, and that there are refugees who may be in refugee camps, but also not living in refugee camps. And the purpose, and we'll see, it's an iterative process. So working with the State Department, working with our overseas partners, I think that this is going to be a ramping up. But our vision is for this to be broad, inclusive, and accessible, because the global loss of talent, as Mary spoke about, as others spoke about, is immense. And so we really, in order to be able to attract students, to support students for education, and so they can have a durable solution for safety and refuge, it's really going to be about casting a proactive, broad net to all students.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. And I think I'll stick with you. I think we have time for just one more question before we wrap up. It's a question about the resources and funding that will be available to refugee students. This person asks if it will cover financial responsibilities like IOM travel loans and status adjustments. I know that a lot of these details might be worked out, but briefly, is there any more you might like to say about even the possibilities for what funding and financing this program could look like?
Again, I actually think I'm going to turn to Sarah, who can speak about some of those issues and maybe what some of the thoughts.
Sure, yeah. So as I started to mention before, we do anticipate putting out a call for proposals for funding opportunities from a wide range of partners. It'll be fully competitive. Our vision for it is primarily to serve as to form the infrastructure that we know will be needed, and to really populate the landscape of actors that will become the partners. Because I think, as many of you know, the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program is truly a public-private partnership, and that's foundational to the way we work. And so we will fully rely on our private partners to help not only carry out the program, but also to provide the supplemental funding that we know will be needed, because the U.S. government, while it will be committing significant resources to this program, it will not be able to cover all of it. And in particular, some of the costs that you all have identified in terms of the cost of tuition and room and board and all of those individual costs. So I'm very eager to see what we can in partnership pull off in terms of providing all of those resources. And just to come back to the earlier question that Miriam started to answer as well, I just want to echo that we fully agree that the program should not be limited in any way in terms of eligibility. And from our perspective, the only two key criteria really are whether the refugee has satisfied the criteria for admission under the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, and whether they have secured admission in a university. So I think putting those two criteria aside, our intention would be for this to be fully universal and global. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. I know we have now run out of time. This hour has gone by so quickly. And I just want to thank everyone again. Erin was one of our co-chairs. Miriam was also one of the co-chairs of working group. This is so exciting. We need your support. We are eager to engage and to partner. We think this is a transformational opportunity for institutions and students. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the speakers.